Is from Deuteronomy. Moses said, "The Lord your God will raise up for you a prophet like me from among your own people. You shall heed such a prophet. This is what you requested of the Lord your God at Horeb on the day of the assembly, when you had said, 'If I hear the voice of the Lord my God any more, or ever see this great fire, I will die.' Then the Lord replied to me, 'They are right in what they've said. I will raise up for them a prophet like you from among their own people. I will put my words in the mouth of the prophet, who shall speak to them everything that I command. Anyone who does not heed the words that the prophet shall speak in my name, I myself will hold accountable. But any prophet who speaks in the name of other gods, or who presumes to speak in my name a word that I have not commanded the prophet to speak, that prophet shall die." Here ends the first lesson, the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
Shall we read together the psalm in your bulletin? I will give thanks to the Lord with my whole heart, in the assembly of the upright, in the congregation. Great are the deeds of the Lord. They are studied by all who delight in them. His word is full of majesty and splendor, and his righteousness endures forever. He makes his marvelous works to be remembered. The Lord is gracious and full of compassion. He gives food to those who fear him. He is ever mindful of his covenant. He has shown his people the power of his works in giving them the lands of every nation. The works of his hands are faithfulness and justice. All his commandments are sure. They stand fast forever and ever, because they are done in truth and equity. He sent redemption to his people. He commanded his covenant forever. Holy and awesome is his name. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Those who act accordingly have a good understanding. His praise endures forever. The second lesson is from 1 Corinthians. Now, concerning food sacrifice to idols, we know that all of us possess knowledge. Knowledge puffs up, but love builds up. Anyone who claims to know something does not yet have the necessary knowledge, but anyone who loves God is known by him. Hence, as to the eating of food offered to idols, we know that no idol in the world really exists, and that there is no God but one. Indeed, even though there may be so-called gods in heaven or on earth, as in fact there are many gods and many lords, yet one for us there is one God, the Father, from whom are all things and for whom we exist, and one Lord, Jesus Christ, through whom we are all things and through whom we exist. It is not everyone, however, who has this knowledge, since some have become so accustomed to idols until now, they still think of the food they eat as food offered to an idol, and their conscience, being weak, is defiled. Food will not bring us close to God. We are no worse off if we do not eat, and no better off if we do. But take care that this liberty of yours does not somehow become a stumbling block to the weak. For if others see you, who possess knowledge, eating in the temple of an idol, might they not, since their conscience is weak, be encouraged to the point of eating food sacrificed to the idols? So by now your knowledge, those weak believers for whom Christ are destroyed. But when thus sin against members of your family and wound their conscience when it is weak, you sin against Christ. Therefore, if food is a cause of their falling, I will never eat meat, so that I may not cause one of them to fall. Here ends the second lesson, the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
disciples went to Capernaum, and when the Sabbath came, he entered the synagogue and taught. They were astounded at his teaching, for he taught them as one having authority and not as the scribes. Just then, there was in the synagogue a man with an unclean spirit, and he cried out, "What have you to do with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." But Jesus rebuked him, saying, "Be silent and come out of him." And the unclean spirit, convulsing him and crying with a loud voice, came out of him. They were all amazed, and they kept on asking one another, "What is this? A new teaching with authority. He commands even the unclean spirits, and they obey him." At once his fame began to spread throughout the surrounding region of Galilee.
Este Evangelio de San Marcos. Jesús y sus discípulos llegaron a Cafarnaúm, y en el sábado Jesús entró en la sinagoga y comenzó a enseñar. La gente se admiraba de cómo les enseñaba, porque lo hacía con plena autoridad, y no como los maestros de la ley. En la sinagoga del pueblo había un hombre que tenía un espíritu impuro, el cual gritó: ¿Por qué te metes con nosotros, Jesús de Nazaret? ¿Has venido a destruirnos? Yo te conozco y sé que eres el Santo de Dios. Jesús reprendió a aquel espíritu diciéndole: cállate y deja a este hombre. El espíritu impuro hizo que el hombre le diera un ataque y gritando con gran fuerza salió de él. Todos se asustaron y se preguntaron unos a otros: ¿qué es esto? Enseña de una manera nueva y con plena autoridad. Incluso a los espíritus impuros da órdenes y le obedecen. Y muy pronto la fama de Jesús se extendió por toda la región de Galilea. Es el Evangelio de San Marcos.
For us in the 21st century, Paul's exposition about Christians eating food offered to idols seemed to have little to do with us, but it was a really big deal for Christians in first century Corinth. To shed some light on today's epistle, a little background may help. When he was in Ephesus, Paul learned about some problems that had arisen in the newly formed church in Corinth. He also received a letter with a host of questions confronting the church. Paul's first letter to the Corinthians dealt with these issues. So right out of the box, we're at a disadvantage. We only have Paul's part of the communication. We have to guess what questions were raised by the Corinthians. However, we know one problem concerned itself with Christians. One problem concerned itself with Christians eating food, especially meat, that was formerly offered to idols. Today in the Western world, a clear demarcation exists between the sacred and the secular. Back when Paul was penning his letter, the secular and the sacred were intermeshed. Today in the West, there are boundaries among and between religious sects. But in Paul's days, no exclusive loyalty existed to one deity or one temple. People were encouraged to participate in the numerous and various religious rituals of the temples and the assortment of deities. To understand this problem of idol food, we should understand that all social and civic life revolved around the myriad temple rituals and fiestas. Back then, the temples were not singular houses of worship like cathedrals. They were also abattoirs, an Anglican word for slaughterhouse, where animals were sacrificed. The temple also were equipped with banquet facilities, both large and small, for communal meals where the food was consumed during the feast days. All Corinthians would have been expected to participate in these festivals because these festivals were the glue that held together the Greco-Roman society with all its social and political institutions. The festivals set the rhythm of the year and ensured that the populace was joined together in common acts centered on common symbols. Today, the slaughtering of animals and the distribution of meat is a totally secular affair, except perhaps for kosher food that is supposedly supervised by rabbis. Not so in the ancient world. Slaughtering of animals, meat consumption, and its distribution were integrated with religious rituals. From today's epistle, it seems that Paul is responding to a request raised by the Corinthian Christians to arbitrate a squabble between two groups, the stronger congregation members with the weaker ones. These two groups had different opinions regarding eating food that was offered to idols. The weaker Corinthians thought it was wrong to eat those foods. They were certain that the pagan gods had contaminated the food, and this would offend God. The stronger members knew it didn't matter because the pagan gods didn't really exist. There was only one God. They may even have been proud of their enlightened knowledge and probably had been flaunting it. The strong believers took the pragmatic line that if the food was good, they should eat it. They behaved as though only their opinion mattered, and they ignored the discomfort that eating idol food caused the members with more sensitive conscience. At a quick reading, it seems that Paul was in theological agreement with the strong members, and that they were technically correct concerning idol food, and it was a matter of indifference for Christians. To quote Paul again, "Some people have a weak sense of right and wrong. They feel guilty. But food does not bring us close to God. We are no worse if we do not eat, no better if we do eat." From the above quote, it appears that food offered to idols should not be an issue per se. However, Paul thought there were problems with both sides. He didn't simply give an answer to the question of the correctness of eating these foods, but shifted the focus to Christian love. And in so doing, he presents an example of ethical thinking where love and respect for others transcends the rightness or wrongness of an act. Paul addressed the hard hearts of the food eaters by saying they actually don't know everything, and they have no right to assert their opinions over others. It's really about having love and concern for the weaker members and not placing temptation in front of them. My next section has a bigger but, bold and in caps. But what if the Corinthians Christians were not asking, can we eat food that was offered to idols? Instead, what if these new Christians were asking, why can't we eat idol food? And I got this from a paper by Dr. Garland from Baylor University. I asked this question because later in the chapter, Paul appears to be addressing the total community and asserting that eating food sacrificed to idols is the equivalent of dining with demons. Joining in meals was extremely important in the ancient world because it served as markers of social economic class, as opportunities to build and reinforce relationship, and as a means to fulfill social obligation. Because religion and politics were indivisible and in a fair city like Corinth, there could be a large festival a month. Probably like the parades at San Miguel. So it would be difficult to acquire foods that did not involve worship in some ways. However, the pressures on the Christian to conform to cultural norm was enormous. Converts who turned from the worship of many gods were not so sure if it were necessary to draw the line when it came to eating food that had been sacrificed to idols. The Christians in Corinth probably did not want to draw that line. The rationalization they probably used for their continued participation was, we're not worshiping an idol, we're just participating in a meal. They did not want to give up their family and their social connections, so they made compromises and justified them post hoc. Paul expected the Christians who turned from idols to create a boundary where none existed before and to dissociate themselves from idolatrous celebrations. Such an uncompromising position would invite ostracism from their unbelieving family and associates. Contrary to one may think from a quick reading of today's epistle, Paul actually forbids all Christian Corinthians from any association with food overtly connected to idolatry. His argument is subtle. He does not immediately denounce their position, but chooses a more circuitous route that winds its way through various facets of the problem, turning it this way and that way in an attempt to persuade them to flee idolatry. Remember, Paul was a rabbi, so he said, on this hand, on this hand, and on this hand. And I think it's a rabbinic expression that says if you see two sides of a problem, you miss the problem because all problems have more than two sides. Paul wrote in chapter 10 that Christians may not consort with idols or even give the appearance that they are. Such restrictions were onerous for converts because any occasion for eating food that was connected with an idol were important and they were numerous. Christians must avoid overt associations with idolatry by declining to attend meals connected to idols in their shrine in the banquet halls. But what should they do if they are invited to be a guest at someone's house? Paul insists that one must abstain from food offered in a home or a market or from a market if one was somehow informed that the food was previously offered to an idol. Paul is anxious that Christians not be sucked back into the vortex of idol worship. Now, to complicate the matter a little bit, Paul advises that when buying food in the market or eating with friends, one should refrain from asking questions about the food provenance. If one doesn't ask, one can eat. If one does ask and gets the wrong answer, then they must refrain. More or less like Bill Clinton's military policy of don't ask, don't tell. Quoting Paul again, do I mean that food sacrificed to an idol is anything, and that an idol is anything? No. But the sacrifices of pagans are offered to demons, not to God. And I do not want you to be a participant with demons. You cannot drink the cup of the Lord and the cup of demons too. You cannot have a part in both the Lord's table and the table of demons. So what is Paul's real position? I think he's chiefly concerned with the Corinthians' continued taste for the greater culture. Now, as I said earlier, there is a boundary between the sacred and the secular. However, since the Enlightenment, the secular has been squeezing out the sacred in the Western world. Christians used to acknowledge special seasons such as Lent and Advent, and celebrate the Paschal Mystery and Christ's Nativity and other feast days. The liturgical year glorified and celebrated the mystery of Christ from his beginning through his death and resurrection to his ascension into heaven. However, now the secular has replaced holy days with holidays. Santa Claus has replaced the Nativity. Instead of contemplating Jesus walking on the road to Emmaus with his disciples, talking about the resurrection, we got Peter Cottontail hopping down the bunny trail. At one time, we sang Christmas carols only during Christmas season. It was Advent, the time before Christmas, and it was a time of preparation for the Nativity. Now it's just a time for shopping and listening to Nat King Cole sing Chestnuts Roasting on an Open Fire. Lent was also a special time for fasting and meditation. Now it's largely ignored in the greater culture, and even in many churches. Some churches just go from Palm Sunday to Easter. They leave out Maundy Thursday. Good Friday, two really special days in the life of Christ. Now I could go on and on, but I think you get my point. Many churches today are not the cohesive communities that Paul expected from the Corinthian Christians. Today's churches are largely Sunday organizations that are completely integrated in our larger secular culture. The Corinthians would have no problems participating in today's churches. I think St. Paul would have some problems with it. Amen.